Well, hey everyone, welcome back to Truth's Manga Cafe. I'm Truth, the owner of Truth's Manga Cafe, a manga cafe which doesn't exist. And I'm here today to tell you about my yearly manga reads, this time encompassing the span of time from summer 2025 to the end of 2025. I think I won't have quite as many to talk about this time around. It's been kind of a busy 6 months for me personally, so hopefully summer 2026 will have a little more on the plate for you. The first one I'm going to get into is a series where I continue buying every volume as soon as it comes out. We're talking about Dan, of course, now up to volume 16 in English. As you might have guessed, my feelings on Dandadan have not really changed at all. It continues to be one of my absolute favorites. As usual, almost every chapter has me continuously going, how does this artist do this every single week? Make such detailed images and such high quality artwork. If you've been around Truth's Manga Cafe for any length of time, you know that I am usually the kind of person who only reads physical volumes of all the manga that I read. And so I know there's probably a good 100 chapters or so of this manga out that haven't come out in print yet. So I'm a little behind the times for the mega fans. So only just now is this person starting to become an actual character in the story. She's been kind of hinted at a few times in a lot of earlier chapters. She's the class president, and she's only just now starting to get embroiled in her own supernatural happenings and kind of becoming a part of the gang, I guess. I'm also very curious about the JoJo-looking character on the cover of Volume 15 here. I think he's been just very briefly mentioned and hasn't really done anything in the story yet. And there is a new character coming up in Volume 16 who I'm going to guess is destined to be another main character. I think I caught a sneak glimpse of him on the cover of Volume 17 coming up. But yeah, and if you haven't watched the Dan anime, I highly recommend that as well. If anything, I don't want to say that it exceeds the manga in terms of art quality, because the manga is also top notch, but they really go above and beyond animating it. There were some musical sequences in the story, and they just completely went all out adapting the music. And there's going to be yet another opportunity for that once they get around to the events of Volume 15 here. And then after that, the story goes in the direction of, I want to say some Jumanji bullshit. I kind of feel if I had to only read one manga for the rest of my life, this could be a strong contender. Because, it's got so much going for it. Great action scenes, great creature designs. It really gives you a full spectrum of emotions. Sometimes it's hilarious and sometimes it's really heartfelt and even heavy at times. It encompasses all of those things very well. And that's why, 16 volumes deep, it continues to be an absolute favorite. This is a must-read, in my opinion. We've got some more of After God to go over. I think a couple more volumes of that came out in the intervening months. And lately I've been recommending this manga to people as a good companion read to The Summer Hikaru Died. That one had an anime adaptation this summer, appropriately. And it blew up even more. The manga was very popular even before the anime started, and as tends to happen, the anime made it only more popular. Anyway, I recommend After God as a companion piece to that because it kind of deals with some similar themes, some similar story structure, where it kind of involves possession in a way. There's multiple characters in After God who are possessed by these gods, whereas, Hikaru, of course, is just about one character being possessed by something or another, which might be a god or a spirit, some kind of unknown entity. But After God is interesting because it's got several of these god-like characters, and they all kind of have their own interlocking relationships, and they, have their allegiances and their likes and dislikes among each other. Like, kind of one of the big players in the story right now is a snake god, and one of his best friends is this rabbit/moon god named Volov. And you kind of find out that the sort of plant-like god that's possessing like the main character, the plant god being called Allura, was producing this drug for the other gods and kind of getting them addicted as a way of like controlling them. And this rabbit god Volov was one of those like addict gods. And even though these are like unknowable, all-powerful beings that could very probably wipe out the human race, you see like kind of a touching moment between the snake god and the rabbit god where they're like reuniting after being apart for a long time, and they're reminiscing and everything, and then the rabbit god just starts asking for more drugs, and starts to give the snake god this impression that he's just using him to get another fix, basically. And, it feels weirdly real for a minute, it kind of like humanizes them, it feels like you're actually watching an addict talking to an old friend and, realizing how addiction has come between them. But the story in After God continues to just get more and more intriguing. A little earlier, I kind of hesitated to mention, like, the main character, because, she starts out as the main character in, like, the first couple of chapters, but she's very often sidelined. Other characters around her very frequently are taking center stage and, like, overshadowing her. So it becomes more like there's an ensemble cast rather than everything kind of being centered around her. Another one of the main characters you get introduced to early on in the story is, this guy who wears an eye patch at all times and has powers of a mysterious nature, and you kind of get to learn a little more about him in the recent volumes I've been reading, like, volume 6 or 7. But some very intriguing things are hinted at with him. He's got some potentially, like, really devastating powers. So yeah, this continues to be one where I read every volume as soon as I see it, and I highly recommend it to everyone that I can convince to give it a try. And since I mentioned Hikaru, I can talk a little more about that one. Only one new volume has come out since I last recorded here. We're just up to volume 6 in English, which is pretty convenient, I guess, because the anime that came out this summer lined up pretty cleanly with volume 5. It's like the very last chapter that appeared in volume 5 was also the very last episode of the anime. But I don't have a lot of new things to talk about with the series. I mean, only one volume has come out, and so, see past Manga Cafe recaps to get a more in-depth look at this one, but basically it does continue to be very good. It continues to be very engrossing and addictive. Volume 6 gives you a bit more hints at the nature of whatever is possessing Hikaru, but things are still pretty vague. So I don't know, I'm kind of hoping that this series doesn't get dragged out too long. I mean, I know it has achieved some pretty high popularity, and hopefully the creator doesn't, like, ride that success to kind of prolong the manga longer than it needs to be. I kind of feel like this story could be resolved with a good, like, 10 or 12 volumes at most, so I'm hoping it's not gonna go on too much longer than that, because I don't know if the big mystery really has long enough legs to carry it farther than that. But for now, very high priority read. We'll continue checking out every volume the minute they get shipped into Trooth's Manga Cafe. Another kind of recent superstar of the manga world that I got caught up on is Kagurabachi. And again, when I say got caught up on, I mean in terms of physical volumes that are out in English, so 5 volumes. And if I'm totally honest, I don't think Kagurabachi is really my thing all that much. I mean, it does have some good things going for it. I mean, sometimes the illustration compositions are really good in the fight scenes. Sometimes the characters' powers are really impressive and cool looking. But I think where it kind of loses me, like especially in the last couple volumes I've read, is that every fight scene also kind of requires 1 or 2 additional characters present to explain everything that's going on in the fight, which really frustrates me. I thought there was way too much of that in the ending volumes of Jujutsu Kaisen, particularly with the big climactic fight between Sukuna and Gojo. I kind of feel like if the characters' powers are so like advanced and incomprehensible that other characters have to explain with paragraphs of text in detail what's happening, then I don't think you've really drawn a good action manga. Like, I don't think you have done an effective job at illustrating the fight scene. Like, personally, I feel like the events of the fight should speak for themselves. I think it's kind of sloppy writing when a character suddenly does something and then you have to immediately cut to another character going, he was able to do that because he used his power in this way that he's never done it before. And so I'm probably gonna stop reading Kagurabachi, at least for now. It's probably going to be something I would watch as an anime, though. And I mean, I think it's inevitable that this gets animated. I mean, the manga has been popular enough. I say it's only a matter of time. I get the honest feeling that the fight scenes are going to be a lot more entertaining to watch than they are to read. And these last couple volumes have been almost entirely action. I get the feeling a lot of the series is going to be that. So, you know, you'll probably hear from me in a couple of years or so when they start animating this. Although, since this is Truth's manga cafe and not Truth's anime cafe, you'll probably have to join my Discord in the cool and epic links down below in the description, and then you can talk to me about more manga and anime there. And when Kagurabachi inevitably gets animated, you can hear my thoughts about it at that time. I can't wait! So, I mentioned in After God that I've been recommending that to people pretty frequently whenever I encounter them in the manga cafe. And the other thing that I try to recommend to everybody who will listen to me for even a second is Tank Chair. I've got volumes 4 and 5 right here. Look at how absolutely sick they look. And for how sick they look on the outside, they are even better to actually read. And unlike After God, I cannot get a goddamn person to read Tank Chair, and I don't understand it. I've told my colleagues working with me at the manga cafe about Tank Chair. They've read it, they agree that it's amazing, and they are equally frustrated that nobody else will buy it. I've started describing Tank Chair as the best thing that nobody is reading. And it's so unfortunate because it's honestly so good. I've probably said this before, but Tank Chair is a manga that doesn't waste your fucking time. The story, like, really gets moving and really goes places. Like, the first 3 volumes are kind of like a self-contained story in themselves, which is just really great, really satisfying. And then volume 4, which I've got right here, is pretty much entirely a flashback volume, pretty self-contained, honestly. And I think last time I made one of these videos, I pointed out this whole, like, rogues gallery of ghoulies and bastards on the back of volume 4, and how none of them had been introduced as characters yet. And, well, they're finally introduced in volume 4. And since it's kind of a flashback volume, I had the thought of, like, oh, these characters are probably, like, mostly gonna die off in this volume. And, in fact, almost none of them died off. only like, I forget exactly, like 1 to 3 of those characters got killed off. There's a couple of them where I can't remember if they lived or not, but the majority of them continued living on, and some of them even appear in Volume 5. And Volume 5 is like a short time skip ahead of the events of the first 3 volumes. And like, Tank Chair has so much going for it. I mean, my favorite elements of it, of course, are just like the composition of action scenes and like the absolute coolness of all of the characters, you know, whether they're a main character or just kind of a briefly appearing side character. I mean, the artwork is not as like lavish and detailed as something like Dandadan. I get the feeling the artist of Tank Chair might be kind of like fairly new to the business, because I don't know, some of the designs can be like fairly simple of the characters, but it's different from reading something like Kagurabachi, where the character designs just look kind of like rough and not as distinct. Like, Tank Chair is a pretty great example of that idea that illustrated characters should be very easily identifiable by silhouette. Whereas you look at something like Kagurabachi and like most of the characters just kind of look like regular people, usually wearing like suits and carrying a sword. And you don't know that much about them until you see when they finally reveal their secret powers. I mean, I also like how a lot of the character designs in Tank Chair kind of tend to inform you a bit about their powers even before they're revealed. Like the character who is always wearing a dog collar also happens to be a werewolf. The character with a mantis head bites the heads off of men. Volume 4 here introduces you to basically like a new character who gets to be the main character of that volume. And she is one of a set of quadruplets, and like all 3 of her sisters' consciousnesses are now also in her subconscious, and she can like split into 4 people and also like phase through solid matter. And you get a hint at this because she has like 4 moles on her face right under her eyes, and when she splits apart, it's only 1 mole in each of one of the 4 spots. But yeah, I mean, overall, I would just say like Tank Chair follows the rule of cool. It makes me think of something like Doro, how, you know, the sorcerers in that series could have all kinds of bizarre powers. And, you know, it was just, you know, sorcery could do whatever as long as it was cool. Tank Chair is a mix of, like, sci-fi powers and, like, ninjutsu powers and, like, genetic experimentation powers. All kinds of weird stuff like that. And just, you know, whatever is cool, the artist throws in there, and that's what makes it so great. Like, Tank Chair continues to be one of my top recommendations, and I will be so sad if it ever falls off. I don't know if it's ever gonna get an anime adaptation, because it's still, like, pretty obscure, I feel like, but oh my god, that would make me so incredibly happy if that ever happens. Alright, Manga Cafe fans. It's time once again to talk about Nagatoro. Well, anyway, I've kind of like shiftily hinted at talking about this series through several of the past yearly Manga Cafe updates. And wouldn't you know it, I finally made the Nagatoro video. It's out, it exists, you can watch it. I think I put it out in like November. It was very emotionally taxing, both on myself and everyone who has watched it so far. At the time I created it, I had not read the final volume of Nagatoro, but now I have. And you know, it was pretty good. I mean, it's pretty much what you would expect. Like, spoilers, the main couple finally become a couple, officially. That's about it, basically. Senpai is about to go off to college while Nagatoro finishes high school, and that's about it. He's basically like, hey, when you graduate, do you want to come live with me? And she's like, yeah, that would be cool. And that's kind of where it ends. And that's about it. I mean, one thing I really did like in the final couple of volumes of Nagatoro was how, like, kind of visually and thematically it goes back to, like, the very first appearance of Nagatoro, when it was just, like, some art that the artist posted up on Pixiv or something like that. And it was, you know, just, like, a first-person sort of comic, but more like series of illustrations with the text of Nagatoro just abusing the faceless character she's sitting across from. It is kind of cool that it looped back around to that, only it made the scene a lot more wholesome and, like, also a lot more thoughtful. Anyway, I don't think you need my wholehearted recommendation of Nagatoro with a manga. I think you probably already know whether or not this is something you have any interest in, but even if you have absolutely no interest in it, I highly recommend you watch my video about it. If I think about it, I'll put one of those little link cards up in the corner of the video or something like that. But if not, then, you know, just look at my channel and find the Nagatoro video. It's gonna be the one that's right before this. I don't post a lot of videos. The warning I would give you, which is the warning that I've given everybody before they watch that video, is you might never be able to look at me the same way again after you watch it. But maybe that's a good thing. Okay, now even though I said this isn't Truth's anime cafe, but it's Truth's manga cafe, we're gonna talk about Gachiakuta now, and we are gonna have to talk about the anime, which just finished airing in the fall. The reason we're gonna have to talk about it is because the anime got ahead of the English volumes of the manga, which is something that I feel like has not happened in this anime manga market in a really long time. It's a pretty freaking rare occurrence. I think since I started reading this manga, I've been saying, like, I could see this becoming like the next big shonen thing, and it's filling those shoes pretty well now. You know, thankfully Bones started animating the anime and they put their A-team on it. Just like, well, they simultaneously somehow put their A-team on the final season of My Hero Academia, but we don't need to go into detail about that since I haven't read any of My Hero Academia. But yeah, we got up to 8 volumes of Gachiakuta this year, and so there's probably going to be like 2+ more volumes that come out in 2026 that are just catching up to the anime now. And depending on when the next season airs, it might blow way ahead of the English volumes of the manga. Anyway, I could tell you the same old business about how Gachiakuta is this really cool action series that is oriented around, like, finding the value in discarded trash things, the idea that one man's trash is another man's treasure, and how it's also a celebration of art and artistic creation. A couple new observations I could make about it is that I get some impression that the artist might want this manga to be turned into a fighting game at some point, because, like, there's definitely, like, some aspects of the character designs and, you know, of the way the fight scenes are conducted that feels like it could really lend itself well to a fighting game. But one of the recent volumes of the manga, and simultaneously one of the episodes in the later half of the anime, did something that I really loved. So, like, you remember early on in Yu Yu Hakusho when, like, Hiei is being introduced as a villain, and he's like monologuing to Yusuke at one point, and Yusuke just like jumps up and punches him in the middle of his monologue. I really loved that. And you get something kind of like that in Gachiakuta, where two of these characters are in like kind of a prolonged fight that's going on for like, you know, multiple chapters. And finally, one of the characters just goes, you know what? Fuck this, and pulls out a fucking gun and shoots her opponent. And I kind of thought that was hilarious. I think I've said before, probably in the past when I talked about Demon Slayer, how I really like it when I'm reading like a fantasy series and, you know, there's all these characters fighting with like swords and other hand-to-hand weapons and using all kinds of special powers. And then another character shows up and just goes, my power is gun. I shoot you with my gun. And they do. And it, you know, goes toe to toe with everybody else's supernatural powers. Now, having watched ahead a little in the anime, you know, having surpassed the manga, my new favorite character is Gita Hebi Fantasia, which is just an all-star name. She hasn't really done much in the manga up to this point, other than go around wearing a kaiju onesie all the time. But you finally get to see her use her vital instrument, which is her kaiju onesie. And I love how it's introduced basically saying, yeah, it's exactly what you think it's gonna be. And it gives her the power to transform into a kaiju. And the way her transformation was animated was just like one of the greatest joys in the entire first season of anime. And you know I'm gonna put it up on screen right now for you to look at. Maybe even more than once, because it's just incredible. It's just some of the most like luxuriant animation. They really gave this like the star treatment. And I cannot wait for more. So next up I'm gonna go into Ruridragon. You may recall last time I did one of these recaps, I said I hope things are gonna take a really interesting turn in Volume 2, because if nothing very interesting happens by that time, I'm probably gonna drop this manga. Well, nothing all that interesting happened in Volume 2. I don't know, personally I wasn't that into it. I mean, some of it is kind of like a repeat of Volume 1, where, you know, more of Ruri's dragon powers are emerging. This time she learns that she can, like, expel electricity, which is like, okay. And then, like, the rest of the volume is about her mom taking her out to the rec center where they, like, play a bunch of sports and games. And then she, like, helps her classmates work on a project, and one of the people she has to work with on the project, like, really doesn't like her, so they have to squash their beef. And it's just kind of like, I don't know, I don't really get this combination of, like, character with emerging supernatural powers crossed with everyday high school life. Because, I don't know, it doesn't feel like they really like complement each other all that much. It's like, you know, a new power of Ruri's awkwardly emerges in class one day. She learns that she has that power and then like just decides, you know, I better not do that in school. So she doesn't. She also doesn't really have any practical reason to use her powers. They're just kind of there. And I mean, her school life isn't all that interesting either. You know, obviously, gaining powers of a dragon introduces a little drama into her life. One or two people at her school are like, that's weird. But most people are just like, oh, that's pretty cool. Anyway, this upcoming test seems pretty tough, we better study. And so, like, I don't know, I mean, it's obviously not an action series, you know, there isn't, like, a threat that she needs to fight with her dragon powers or anything. There isn't, like, a destiny that she needs to fulfill, it doesn't seem. But, I don't know, there's just, you know, like, not really a lot of stakes. but at the same time, there's also not a lot of humor. I don't know, there's just like not a lot going on. What I can say is, I mean, I think the artist is pretty good at drawing cute and charming characters, and I kind of feel like that's probably the strength that got Ruridragon published and made. So yeah, I don't know, I don't think it's really gonna be for me, probably. I remember, like very recently I saw a headline that Kyoto Animation, you know, the animators of such hits as Nichijou and City, are soon going to be animating Ruridragon. And when I saw that headline, literally my gut reaction was to go, why? And I'm just like, you know, good for them. I hope it does well, but I'm probably not going to be following along that closely. Now, we've got a little more Spy Family to go over. I'm now up to volume 14 or 15, I think. I actually forget which one most recently came out in the US. And so, personally, I feel like Spy Family is as good as ever at doing what it does great. I think it's still very funny. I think the characters are still very charming and entertaining. I, of course, will continue to read every volume of Spy Family that we get at Truth's Manga Cafe, and in all likelihood I'll continue watching the seasons of the anime as they come out. But I want to talk slightly harshly about Spy Family, and I don't want to give the impression that, like, I'm starting to become a hater or anything. But I'm starting to get the impression that, like, Spy Family is becoming passé. And I hate to say that, because, you know, it's still very good. It's still very entertaining. I don't feel like it has fallen off in terms of quality, but I feel like it's not getting, like, the same level of attention as it once did from the patrons of the Manga Cafe. I feel like 2 or 3 years ago, every new volume was selling out so fast, and, you know, the Manga Cafe was selling it by the dozens and had to constantly order more in. But now, you know, the latest volume came out in like November or December, and I got, you know, a good 20 copies of that in, and I don't think I've even sold that many. And so, like, personally, I couldn't tell you why that is. I still think it's as good as ever. Like, if I had to complain about Spy Family, I could bring some things up. I mean, I could say, I think the story progresses very slowly. I think, you know, how it's got the whole plot of Operation Strix, which is, you know, Twilight trying to infiltrate Eden Academy, where Anya is going to school and where the Desmond family has attended. And the way Spy Family conducts itself, it feels like it's treating that plot line as like the be-all end-all plot line of the manga. Like, if Anya ever gets her 7 stars for, you know, her academic excellence, then the story must end. If Twilight ever meets Donovan Desmond, then the story must be at an end. And so for that reason, I think most chapters feel like diversions. You know, most chapters feel like just one-off stories featuring these characters and don't actually progress that main plot in any way. I could say that's a complaint, but also I don't think that's a big problem. Just because, like I said at the beginning, I think the manga is still doing everything it does well, very well. But Spy Family really does enjoy its diversions. The past couple of volumes that I've read have been largely focused on the headmaster of Anya's school and the, like, personal assistant slash bodyguard to the Black Bell family, as in Becky Blackbell, Anya's best friend at school. And it's been all about their past and what their lives were like when they were teenagers and young adults, and their experiences with the war. And, like, honestly, the plot with those two characters was really engaging. I thought they had a really well-written story, and it was like very emotional and just well executed all around. That said, it does absolutely nothing to move the plot forward. So, I mean, I guess I could understand if there are people out there that take issue with that. I'm personally still loving it, and I hope that the hype continues. Alright, another series I've been reading is Welcome to Ghost Mansion, which has only had one additional volume come out since last I made one of these videos. And I guess I don't have a whole lot to add about this one. I mean, like I said when I first introduced it, it's, you know, a pretty good mix of like both comedy and horror. It's mostly comedic though, because, you know, it's about like the main character is kind of like this, I don't know, I want to say like sleazy landlord who bought an apartment building, and she will basically go to any means to convince ghosts to become tenants in her apartment building and start paying rent. You know, I hesitated to call the main character sleazy because, you know, she is just like a very like conniving businesswoman, but she also does genuinely help a lot of the ghosts in the story. And that's kind of like a recurring element of it, is it's like sympathetic exorcisms. Basically, she and other main characters continuously encounter ghosts, and when other characters react with fear and revulsion and try to fight back against the ghosts, our main character is the only person who actually hears them out and, you know, lends them a sympathetic ear and often makes them feel a lot better, and then she convinces them to go live in her apartment building and become rent-paying tenants there. It's a pretty fun premise. I mean, it can be kind of repetitive. I say that having only read 2 volumes. I mean, it could start going in different directions as it goes on. But I mean, I also think that the quality of the horror illustrations in it is very good. I mean, it almost reminds me of something like PTSD Radio, only drawn a little less realistically, because it is still, at heart, a comedy manga. And so this is one of those series where, like, I'm not gonna say I think it's super underrated. I'm not gonna say, like, everybody needs to be reading this. I'm not gonna say this needs an anime adaptation yesterday. Or, like, it's only a matter of time before this one gets a screen adaptation. I know it's, like, very lesser known, and it's nothing life-changing, but, you know, it's pretty good. I would casually recommend it. Okay, so now, I guess we gotta talk about Dr. Stone again. So, very unexpectedly, Volume 27 of Dr. Stone dropped. Sure, Volume 27. You know, it ended pretty conclusively in Volume 26. There really was nothing left to wrap up. And then Volume 27 came along for no reason. It's, still really weird to me that this exists. And, I don't know, it kind of feels like a lot of the point of it was, like, wrapping up things that didn't need wrapping up. Like the volume starts at the very beginning. It starts with Senku stranded out in the middle of the ocean, and he has no memory of how he got there, and he's just totally alone with nothing there at all. And it takes on this structure like kind of a microcosm of the Dr. Stone manga itself, how it's about Senku starting with nothing, and eventually, you know, he starts gathering up debris that's floating in the ocean, and he's like building a raft and working his way back to land and rescuing other people who are also floating out in the ocean with him. And so I was like, well, that's kind of cool. It's like another twist on the Dr. Stone premise, how it's about starting with nothing and using the power of science to work your way back to civilization. Other large parts of this volume have to do with the characters trying to build a time machine and, I don't know, like, send a message into the past, or, you know, receive a message from the past, or something like that. And, like, I don't know, it's kind of silly, because a lot of the allure of Dr. Stone is how it teaches you things about real science and, like, the real ways that technology developed in human history. And a time machine is just fantasy. Part of this volume was also about, I think I mentioned this, answering lingering questions that nobody really needed the answers to. Like, at one point, you know, it shows the wedding of Chrome and, what was her name? Hold on. Ruri. It shows the wedding of Chrome and Ruri, and other characters are like, oh, Senku, when are you gonna get married? Are you gonna marry Kohaku or Luna? And Kohaku is like, oh, if you want to get married, I'd agree to that, I suppose. And, like, Senku is just like, I don't really care about getting married. It's whatever. And I don't know, it felt like just kind of a pointless fan pandering moment that led to nothing. And then, like, bizarrely, there were like 3 pages or so where it was like, I don't know, covering plot holes that fans had mentioned. You know, it was like totally asinine stuff. It's like, well, why did this character say they were going to offer a birthday present to this other character when it has been established that this character's birthday is actually in a completely different month? And it's like, wow, who gives a shit? Why did we need to talk about this? Why does this warrant publishing in an epilogue volume of manga? So, yeah, I don't know. I guess it's like kind of fascinating that volume 27 of Dr. Stone exists, but it's also totally pointless. We absolutely did not need it. I don't think it really adds anything, like, plot-wise or thematically to the story of Dr. Stone. It's just kind of an awkward appendix volume. Alright, now we're gonna have to talk about School Zone Girls. Yeah, this summer, you know, shortly after I posted my mid-year recap, I decided to go back to this one. And, you know, I remember noticing on my anime list that the series is only 5 volumes long, so I was like, yeah, you know, I should go back, revisit this, and, you know, finally finish it out. Because, you know, it's a really good series. I think I described it in the past as, like, Nichijou if every single character was a dumbass lesbian. It's kind of like that. I mean, it's less surreal than Nichijou. You know, it's not as bizarre as Nichijou, but I think it's at least equally funny. Like, I was downloading some images of the manga for the purposes of this video, and as I'm doing that, I'm just like, oh man, I love these characters. I love this character. I love that character. I love that character. And, like, it was taking me a long time because I would be scrolling through pages of the manga and end up just, like, rereading entire chapters of it because I was, like, having so much fun revisiting it for the second time now. And, you know, I also like that there's such a broad cast of characters, and, like, so many of them, like, don't even interact with each other, or just rarely cross paths. Like, aside from kind of the main pair of characters, probably my favorite is this one named Utsugi Ren, who is arguably the dumbest and also the most hyperactive character, who basically will say to somebody else, like, you and I are gonna be best friends whether you like it or not. And there's so much I adore about this manga. Like, I love how good the artist is at drawing facial expressions, and, like, how varied they are, and, like, how cartoony it can be. And like just how over the top everyone is with their every decision. And you know, the characters feel so varied but also so natural and realistic. Some of them even have like surprisingly heavy backstories that inform their like present day personalities and ways they interact with other characters. And so, you know, I've sung these tremendous praises on School Zone Girls, and you're probably dying to know what am I gonna think of the ending. Because, like, there's this whole lengthy buildup of, like, oh, is Yokoi gonna confess her feelings to Kei? And how is that gonna change their friendship? And is she going to accept her feelings? And, you know, it was leaving me in so much suspense. And it was this, like, super tense moment. And I get to the end of Volume 5, the final volume. And then I get hit with... Why? So, turns out this manga has been on hiatus since 2022. And there is no sign of it ever resuming. But God, I hope one day it does resume. This is the only manga that this artist has ever made, according to my anime list, except for like a single one-shot that came out in 2025. That's it. So yeah, I don't know, maybe now they're like happily working a job digging ditches somewhere because they're not making any of this fucking manga. I was hoping to find out, you know, like maybe there was at least like a spiritual successor to School Zone Girls that this artist started making. But no, man, it's fucking nothing. It's just such a shame. I mean, I really love this artist's sense of humor. There's really like nothing I can very readily compare it to. I mean, I did say it's kind of Nichijou-esque, only less surreal. And so, you know, I can always read more of like City, and I could go and read Nichijou and get some of that sense of humor in my life, but nothing is quite the same as School Zone Girls. It's honestly hilarious. And like, not only is it hilarious, but I also genuinely love pretty much all of the characters, and I want to see more of all of them. So, you know, if this manga artist happens to take an interest in extremely obscure American manga YouTubers and comes across this video, you have at least one fan out here who would be so happy to see more. Please continue making School Zone Girls. It is so funny. I have no idea if I'm your target audience in the least, but oh my god, it's one of the funniest things I've ever read. I just realized I didn't really like put these series in any kind of order, you know. I would usually like categorize them by genre or like separate them by like things I finished or things that are still ongoing or things that I dropped, and like I didn't do any of that this time, huh? Anyway, let's talk about Kindergarten Wars, I guess. So this one popped up in the manga cafe one day, and I had, you know, a mild passing interest in it. I was like, that looks like a funny premise. And I picked it up because a buddy of mine was like, hey, I've got the Shonen Jump app. Maybe we should, like, buddy read something. And I was like, how about Kindergarten Wars? We could both check out Volume 1 and see how we like it. And so we did. And we were both like, it's pretty good. We were like, it's alright. Yeah, Volume 2 came out, and I haven't read Volume 2. Anyway, the premise of Kindergarten Wars, if you're not familiar, is it takes place at a school for high-profile people like politicians and billionaires whose children are often the targets of kidnapping or assassination attempts. And because people are always trying to kidnap or assassinate these children, all of the faculty, all of the teachers, and everybody else at this school are highly trained professional killers. I think it was mentioned that like some or all of them are like actual convicted murderers who are working there as a way to like shorten their sentences. I don't know, maybe I'm pulling that out of my ass because it's been a few months since I read volume 1 here. But the other part of the premise is that the main character, Rita, is a single lady who desperately wants a boyfriend. And so, like, every time she meets one of the would-be assassins or kidnappers who come to this school, she kind of, like, interrogates them. First she says, "Who sent you?" And then she asks them about, like, their interests and hobbies. And, if they turn out not to be a match for her, she just kills them. And, the first 2 chapters have almost this exact same structure where would-be assassin comes to the school, Rita stops them and confronts them, and then asks them a bunch of questions, and then kills them when they turn out to have a red flag. The structures of these 2 chapters are like so similar, even some of the like illustrations are just composed in exactly the same ways. So my verdict on Kindergarten Wars overall is like, I don't know. It seems like it could be the next Sakamoto Days, and Sakamoto Days seemed like it was trying to be the next Spy Family, but didn't quite have the chops, but it was at least pretty good at being its own thing. And Kindergarten Wars it's like, I don't know, maybe it comes into its own later on, but I don't know if I really care enough to read another volume when I could read something new that's more intriguing to me. Boy, I probably should have talked about this next one right after I talked about School Zone Girls instead of interrupting it with Kindergarten Wars. But anyway, another series that I decided to go back and finish this summer was Ayumu, aka When Will Ayumu Make His Move? I talked about this one probably in like the very first yearly manga recap, and you know, ever since then, you know, I've always been like, it's pretty good. You know, it's alright. Yeah, so if you don't recall in, you know, the intervening years since I last read this manga, the premise of Ayumu is, this one guy in high school joins the shogi club because he has a crush on the shogi club president, but he's not going to confess his love to her until he beats her fair and square at a game of shogi. And at the same time, he's also, like, not making it a point to hide his feelings. He's just, like, very blunt about them. And every time he says something blunt and straightforward about his feelings, she gets all flustered and blushes a lot. Repeat that process for, like, 200-something chapters. Yeah, that's about it. That's what happened in Ayumu. And I finally finished it, and wouldn't you know it, in the final chapter, he beats her fair and square at a game of shogi and confesses his love for her, which obviously she returns, and they lived happily ever after. What the fuck did you expect? Yeah, I mean, this manga was very consistently okay. It was always just good enough to keep me reading, but not good enough for me to tell anybody in my life, this is the best thing ever, you gotta read it. There's just like a few things I want to point out as odd about it. One thing that's odd is like, there is this side character who is introduced to create like a love triangle between Ayumu and, what's her name? Urushi, the main girl. Cause like she also has a crush on him, but like, I don't know, this drama doesn't really, like, go anywhere. She just kind of has a crush on him, and nothing really becomes of that. And I felt like that was kind of like a loose thread that the artist could have, like, wrapped up in some way. Like, an ideal way to do that would have been, like, introduce another side character for her to become interested in. And, you know, you don't even necessarily have to give them, like, a fleshed out relationship, but maybe, like, introduce some glimmer of hope that she's not going to spend the rest of her life crushing on a guy that she will never be with. Because that's just kind of fucking depressing. The other thing I want to point out that's kind of odd about this is just like the main girl, Urushi, is drawn so childlike. It gets to be a little disturbing. Like, she's supposed to be what, like a high school senior, I think, and she looks like she's 7 years old. And I think to some extent that's just like a problem with this like cutesy manga moe art style, where like you can't really draw like a grown-ass woman in like you know, with like that kind of body type where she's like short and slim, without just making her look like a child. Because, you know, it's also like she's literally like half the size of Ayumu, it looks like, in some of the illustrations. I kind of feel like she even gets smaller as the manga goes on. Like, she looks like she could be right at home attending kindergarten with Anya Spy Family. But I think, you know, the saving grace that, you know, allowed me to continue reading the manga and not be completely disgusted is, like, I don't feel like she was ever really drawn in a way to make her seem like desirable, and instead the story was more about like the dynamic between her and Ayumu. That was more of what made it entertaining, so it like gets a tentative pass for that reason. The other weird thing I want to bring up, the last weird thing, is like when it gets to the end of the manga and, you know, it's like the last day of school and the last time the shogi club is gonna meet, and, you know, it's time for Ayumu to go and have his last game against Urushi and finally get his chance to defeat her in a game. It's really like unnerving the way like every side character is there, like, you know, cheering him on and being like, yeah, go get her, and they all are like in on this, and like everybody knows his plans and intentions, and just like, I don't know, the way he's like going off to the shogi club room to meet with her and how she's like waiting there, and like every single character in this manga has all these same expectations. It came to feel like it's their fucking wedding night, and he's like on his way to consummate the marriage. And it's like, I don't know, it's just so bizarre. Except, you know, it's that scenario, but just like in a completely chaste way, where like all that's going to happen is they're gonna play shogi and he's gonna tell her he has a crush on her, which everybody fucking knows already. So it's weird how it like achieved this level of like ceremony in the story, how it became this like lofty thing, and it's like, I don't know, it felt like a little too much at that point. It was like a little too built up to like feel real or natural. I think things went like just a little too long, to the point that kind of scene became unnerving and bizarre and didn't feel natural anymore. So, would I recommend that you read Ayumu? It's okay. It's whatever. If you want, if you feel like it, I guess it's okay. I didn't hate it. All right, let's talk about a couple more things that I bought this year. So, you know, Dungeon Meshi, the manga, has unfortunately ended, but it did end very satisfyingly. I thought it was a very appropriate length, you know, it didn't overstay its welcome. And then after that, we even got this cool book, the Adventurer's Bible, that gives you a lot more like information about the world of Dungeon Meshi and like all the characters and monsters that live there. And then the deluxe version of the Adventurer's Bible came out, and it's like 40 pages longer-ish, and it's not like a hardcover or anything, but it has a little like dust jacket, which is kind of nice. It's an extremely fragile dust jacket made of very thin paper. But that's pretty cool. I already talked about this Adventurer's Bible in a past recap, I'm sure. And so this is just another version of that's got some additional material in it. It's got some more like cool side comics featuring the characters, some of whom didn't get all that much attention during the main story of the manga. So it was cool to get to see a little bit more of them. And then I also bought this book, which my green screen must be loving. It's called Daydream Hour, which is doodles by Ryoko Kui, the creator of Dungeon Meshi. And this one, like it says, it's mostly doodles of the characters from the series. It's also got some 1 or 2 page long comics featuring side stories with all these characters, giving you a lot more backstory and a lot more information about them, and fleshing out the world even more. And this one's really cool because, most of the illustrations are in color, and it's cool to see like so many different illustrations of the characters. Some of them are like, here's what the characters would look like in modern day clothing. Here's what it would be like if all the characters did a secret Santa exchange. Here's what each character would buy for somebody else. Here's what each character would think about the gift that they randomly received. And I just want to say, I wish every manga could receive as much love from its creator as Dungeon Meshi does. This is an artist who just adores every single character she makes. It's like she just can't stop drawing them. She can't stop giving them so much attention and love and treating them so lavishly. But also, it's a shame that more of this story material couldn't have been included in the main manga of Dungeon Meshi. Because you look at this is basically 2 volumes of manga right here. And it's, packed full of world building and exposition about so many of the characters, some of whom barely do a thing in the main story. And so, after reading these side books, it's I feel like I know these characters so well. I know them so much better than I did when I had just read the main manga. And now if I go back and reread Dungeon Meshi, which I'm probably gonna do because I own every volume, I'm now gonna know so much more about these characters who barely did anything. And I'm gonna go know so much about their lives, so much of which is not even going to be relevant to the story at all. But yeah, I don't know, it's just, these books are really cool. I'm not gonna go as far as to say, I wish there were more volumes of Dungeon Meshi, because I feel like it told its story very well. It was just the right number of volumes, it didn't get too prolonged, it didn't feel rushed or anything like that. It felt like it was just the exact right length. And so, I wasn't left from the ending wishing for more. I felt like I got everything I wanted out of the series. It was perfectly satisfying. And the supplementary material is cool for someone like me who just really loved the experience, but it's also not necessary for someone who doesn't care about the side characters or the past events of the main characters' lives. And so, it's a very easy if you love Dungeon Meshi, you gotta check these things out. If you think Dungeon Meshi is just okay, first of all, what's wrong with you? But also, you totally don't need to feel any obligation to even look at these books. I read a pretty cool single volume manga recently called Before You Go Extinct. I saw this show up at the manga cafe and I knew absolutely nothing about it. Knew nothing about this manga or this artist or anything. And I want to give you the experience that I had when I first picked this up. I want you to take a look at this cover and give it a vibe check. What do you think this manga is going to be like? What do you think it'll be like thematically, emotionally? What do you think the story material will be? And then I want you, after you have that idea in your head, to take a look at page 1. and see just how very wrong you are. I went around to several of my colleagues at the Manga Cafe after I discovered this, and I had them go through that exact experience. I said, take a look at the cover, tell me everything you think you can tell me about this manga before you open it up, and then look at page 1. And basically everybody who did this cracked the fuck up as soon as they looked at page 1. But I decided to go ahead and read the whole thing. You know, it's only a single volume. It was like 5 or 6 stories in that one volume. And it was honestly like surprisingly really good, like surprisingly thought-provoking and even emotional sometimes. It's actually this kind of like really thoughtful meditation on ideas like death and extinction and the value of your time on Earth and what it means to waste time or to spend your time well, or is there even any meaning in any of that? Or does the complete lack of meaning actually make everything beautiful? And every chapter takes place from the perspective of a different, like, endangered animal, and their different perspectives on all of those kinds of topics. And, like, there's this recurring motif. It starts in chapter 1 of, like, a penguin holding on to a stone, like, to keep it warm. And that, you know, ties into that idea of, like, are you wasting your time, or, like, are you putting value into your time? And maybe doing this thing, you know, taking part in this act that is not going to have really any end result isn't such a waste of time after all. And throughout the other chapters, it even makes these, like, bizarre, like, non sequitur callbacks to the first chapter about the idea of warming a stone, or the idea of killing off all the other penguins. But honestly, it's just like, it's one of the most thought-provoking, contemplative works that you will ever see, starring cutesy little animal characters. I honestly would highly recommend checking this out. It's like very surprisingly deep and philosophical, which, you know, I wasn't sure if I was gonna get out of it. You know, once I checked out, like, the cover and page 1, I was like, okay, this is either going to be completely ridiculous or, like, maybe it actually has something surprising to say. And, you know, I think it is the latter. I think it actually will have some, like, surprisingly profound impact on you if you read it. So please do. Right, now the last thing I'm going to talk about here that I actually bought is the latest memoir manga from Nagatoro. You know, the creator of My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness, and My Alcoholic Escape from Reality, and My Pancreas Broke, but My Life Got Better. Now she's here with My Twisted Eating Disorder. Yeah, so, I'm sure you've heard me talk about this artist's manga before. It's been one of those situations where I'm thinking I simultaneously do and don't hope that she comes out with even more manga. Because everything that she puts out, or, you know, everything at least that gets published in English, is a memoir about her life and her struggles. And my god, does she have a lot of struggles. So, you know, basically every book of hers that I have read has ended with me thinking, my god, I hope she doesn't turn up dead within like 3 years, but also I wouldn't be surprised if she does. You know, it's always been this sort of tug-of-war of like, I hope she keeps making manga because that at least means she's alive. And also I kind of hope she doesn't keep making manga because maybe that means she'll have gotten to a better place with all of her many problems. So, like, you know, if more books of hers keep coming out in English, then, like, at least I know she's alive out there somewhere. And so, you know, this volume, it is pretty much exactly what it says on the cover. It is about an eating disorder. Interestingly, it starts out being almost more like a food diary of like, here are some of the foods that I really enjoy, and here are like the specifics of why I enjoy these foods, including like their textures and flavors. And like, here's what makes a food more or less appetizing to me. And like, apparently that was kind of the original conception of this manga, was it was going to be like a food diary kind of thing. But then very quickly it changes course and it becomes, the reason I liked the textures of all of these foods is that they come up easier when I'm throwing up. And so, you know, it goes a lot into her personal experiences with binging on certain foods and then purging later on. And you know, a thing I gotta say about this manga is like, it wasn't as hard to read as I expected it to be, mostly because it largely doesn't feel like she's exploring her problems or like expressing them to the reader as problems, and it's more of like, this is my daily routine and these are the foods I like, and also I intentionally throw up these foods after eating tons and tons of them. That's like more included in there as like an asterisk of, you know, it's like a footnote of like, oh, and also I induce vomiting and like flush these foods down the toilet after I eat them. And all the way up to the end, you know, it ended on kind of a weird note, because she's kind of like, yeah, these are my eating habits and I'm okay with that. Also, I talked to a therapist who specializes in eating disorders, and she said it's totally okay if I want to like continue inducing vomiting in myself every single day of my life, and there are absolutely no long-term ramifications to that. It's totally cool for me to do that forever. And I'm just like, is it? I was like, is it really okay to do this forever? Like, I mean, emotional impact aside, like, even ignoring the fact that you're okay with it, you know, you're at peace with it, I feel like there are gonna be physical effects on your body to doing this, and like, you know, in like a totally not critical or like hateful way. Like, this is concerning. Like, I think there's more factors here than just, are you emotionally okay with this? And you know, I'm no therapist specializing in eating disorders, but it seems like a very bad practice for a therapist specializing in eating disorders to tell you that vomiting every single day, possibly multiple times a day, is gonna have absolutely no negative effect on you. If you're okay with it, I'm okay with it. But like I said, maybe I'm the one who doesn't know what I'm talking about. I don't know. I am not the expert. I'll just reiterate my previous opinions of, I hope Nagatoro continues to be okay in life, and I hope she doesn't die young from all of her many poor health habits, eating disorder aside. Let's go on to a bit of a lighter topic and talk about characters getting their fucking hearts ripped out of their chests in Choujin X. Choujin X continues to rule. It's kind of up there with Tank Chair in that this is one of the best things that nobody is reading. I mean, like, Choujin X, it is at least getting some attention because it's the creator of Tokyo Ghoul, and I think that fame is kind of giving it a little bit of a leg up in sales versus Tank Chair. But I still want to see more people reading it. It is basically, you know, another superhero story in the vein of something like an X-Men or a My Hero Academia, where, you know, each character has a unique superpower different from anybody else's superpower, and all of the kind of unique fights that they get into with those weird matchups. The thing is, Choujin X is elevated by just some absolutely outstanding artwork. And Choujin X, it's got a little bit more of a horror angle to it. Not that it's without levity, it also has like its own sense of humor, which I honestly do enjoy. The moments of levity aren't like super common, but when they do come along, they are genuinely really funny. It's like if you took Dandadan and like put in a little less humor and a little bit more horror and action, then you've got Choujin X. Which is, another one of those series where I'm like constantly dumbfounded at the quality of this artist's work, where I'm just like, how does he do this so consistently every single time? I think a good thing that sets Choujin X apart from something like Dandadan is, I think it's like Ishida's eye for composition in the action scenes. Like, I feel like sometimes he's taking a more holistic look at the page and, like taking into account, like, not just making everything really detailed, but also creating, like, I don't know, more of an overall picture. Like, really taking the full page into consideration. And, not just how it looks when you have it close up to your face, examining every single detail, but like how it would look from a distance when you're only seeing like the broad strokes. Like that, I would say, is something that sets Ishida apart from a lot of other artists, particularly in like the action manga genre. And, at the same time, he's also very good at creating those like meticulously detailed illustrations. And, it all coalesces into what is just some of the coolest horror action manga out there on the market today. I don't have a new volume of Die Dark to talk about this time around, but if I did, I would be bringing that comparison in here too. And I'd probably be saying that, like, Die Dark is like, if you had those 3 sliders of, like, comedy and action and horror, Die Dark is, like, more horror than Choujin X, and more humor than Choujin X, but like less action than either of the other two. I mean, Die Dark does still have a lot of action scenes, but, I'm not so much reading it for like the composition of action scenes like I am with a Choujin X or a Dandadan. That's a series where I'm more reading it for like the intricate horror illustrations and, to a good extent, the sense of humor also. But yeah, anyway, please read Choujin X. Why haven't you started it yet, stupid? I really hope Choujin X gets an anime one of these days. From what I hear, I only watched season 1 of Tokyo Ghoul and I haven't read any of it, but I hear that they kind of fucked up with the anime. I heard that it kind of sucked compared to the manga. And so part of me wonders if Ishida felt kind of burned by getting an anime adaptation last time, and like maybe he's reluctant to accept that immediately for Choujin X. Maybe he or other parties involved want to wait until the story is finished, or at least close to being finished, before they like greenlight a screen adaptation. But I would love to see such a screen adaptation. Obviously, I hope they would do as perfect a job with it as they can. I hope it's as good an adaptation as like a Gachiakuta or a Dandadan. I got another new one that I read a single volume of. This is Magical Midlifer. I read this very recently. Only 1 volume is out in English so far. And I was drawn to this one much in the same way I was drawn to Magical Girl Incident. Just personally, I feel like the magical girl genre has a lot of potential for parody and comedy, and I don't really think any series has like really leaned into that very well. I mean, I'm sure you get like your one-off parodies, probably in a series like Gintama, but I felt like there was so much potential in a series like Magical Girl Incident, and it didn't really become any of what I hoped it would be. Now we've got Magical Midlifer, which is another sort of magical girl parody, and I'm not that optimistic about it based on Volume 1. The premise is like, this is a world where magical girls exist, they fight witches, but sometimes after a magical girl fight, the witch's familiar is left behind, and it grows to incredible power, and the Magical Midlifer is part of an organization that has to show up and, like, clean up the remnants of the fight professionally and efficiently. And that's a pretty funny premise. It's pretty funny how they give Tanaka, the main character, like a magical boy transformation. And, you know, it's funny how there's like very little of the like magical razzle dazzle to any of his attacks. He's just, you know, like very plainly like extending out his arm with a wand and doing a straightforward attack and, you know, cleaning shit up immediately. After Volume 1, I'm not sure, I'm just very optimistic that this manga knows where to go to take things in like a compelling and funny direction. In one of the first few chapters, it sets up this sort of main magical girl character, and how she encounters Tanaka and realizes, wow, he's so powerful. Maybe I could learn from him and train under him and learn to become as powerful as he is. And then, you know, they basically just like sit on a bench and chat one day, and he's like, you know, I don't think what I do is all that spectacular. I just do my job every day, whether I like it or not, and eventually you just kind of get used to it. And, you know, that's like the inspiring speech that he gives her. And then they didn't really interact much after that in Volume 1. I think another kind of factor that puts me off of wanting to read much more is like, there's not really that much going on with the artwork. I think it's just, you know, fairly average. Some pages, there's just like very little illustration going on at all. Like sometimes a whole page is just like 3 illustrations of the character who is speaking on a plain white background with big speech bubbles, and like, that's it. You know, this is a medium where like the visuals are gonna represent at least 50% of the allure of your series, and so your writing is gonna have to be extremely strong to make up for a lack of visual quality. You know, look at something like Mob Psycho or One Punch Man, where the storytelling is so good that, you know, it doesn't matter how the artwork looks. Editor's note, I only watched season 1 of One Punch Man, and I have not read the manga of Mob Psycho at all, nor have I read any of One Punch Man. I just felt like that should be said. Point being, Magical Midlifer is not Mob Psycho, and it is not One Punch Man. Based on Volume 1, I don't think it's going to be as funny as either of those examples. And, you know, I would maybe read one more volume if I have like absolutely nothing else on the shelf to check out, but I will be surprised if that happens. I get the feeling this is going to be just another misguided attempt at a magical girl parody that doesn't go much farther than about 3 volumes. And if for some reason this one actually has legs and it gets like 20 plus volumes, and they release in the US also, I guess I'm gonna have to eat my hat and read those 20 volumes. Well, it's almost time to wrap things up here. Another thing that I revisited this summer and, you know, finally decided to go back and finish was Doomsday with my dog. I read volume 1 of this a few years back, and I was like, you know, this is pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and read the remaining 3 volumes. And I was under the impression all this time that Doomsday with My Dog is a finished series. According to my anime list, it is still ongoing, but new chapters have not come out in quite some time. So, I don't know. Honestly, this is a manga where, like, you could pretty much stop reading at any volume and consider it a finished series. Because even though each chapter is just kind of a one-off story, sometimes interlinking for like 3 to 5 chapters at a time, but, you know, rarely even doing that. Each volume also tends to have like a more structured and emotional story that closes things out and, you know, comes to a very good conclusion, which is also like open-ended for more story. Well, yeah, I mean, if you don't remember me talking about Doomsday with My Dog before, the basic premise is, you know, it's about a high school girl and her dog wandering the earth after the human race has vanished from it for whatever reason. And they encounter lots of other talking dogs and talking animals and aliens and cryptids, and they tend to have just a whole lot of deeply philosophical conversations while they are wandering the earth. and it's just generally a lighthearted comedy, which has the added bonus of being illustrated completely in full color. But yeah, I mean, as someone who just personally really likes dogs, obviously I have kind of a bias towards this manga. I really like that there are so many different dog breeds as characters in the manga. Some of them just pop up once or twice, but some of them, like the Husky and the German Shepherd, show up pretty frequently. There's also like a collie that's obsessed with BL for some reason. And, you know, of course there's like the different colors of Shiba Inu who show up and are side characters, including the white Shiba Inu, one of which I used to live with, you might remember. You know, she even had like the exact same toasted tips on her ears, where she had, you know, just a little brown hair on the ends of her ears and the rest of her was white. If you are part of the Trooth Discord or a follower of my Twitch channel, you might recognize that some of the emojis in those places are derived from the Shiba Inu I used to live with. Her name was Chi-Chi, by the way. She belonged to my previous roommate. She's still around, you know, she didn't, like, die or something. But, this manga really, like, nails her personality pretty well. Chi-Chi was kind of a bitch. Literally. For your enjoyment, I will give you a video clip of Chi-Chi along with her fellow dog, Charlie, who was just a consummate good boy all the time. Here was one night when they had both been given rawhide bones to chew on, and Chi-Chi was just inconsolable at the fact that Charlie was allowed to chew on a bone. Chi-Chi was the kind of bitch who would be like, it's not enough that I should succeed, others should fail. She didn't want to have a rawhide bone and chew on it, but she didn't want Charlie to have one. So she just, like, stared at him the whole time he chewed on his and would periodically bark in his face. That's the type of shit Chi-Chi was always on. I've got a couple of, like, semi-epilogues to go over here. And by that I mean there were two manga that I read in this segment that I was not really able to get any images of. They just, like, aren't on the internet as far as I can tell. At least not on any of the sources I know. So, you know, I read the physical volumes of them. I even bought one of them and own it. That one would be Dementia 21, which I, you know, talked about last time. I said I had read one of the two volumes that came in the complete series, and I'm sure I would be talking about it again this time. And well, here I am, but with no images to show for it. And Dementia 21 was this very zany comedy manga. It has a main character who is like an elder care expert, and every single chapter basically would start with a fairly ordinary but somewhat odd situation where she needs to take care of an elderly person or persons, and there would just be, you know, like some small comedic or sci-fi-y twist on the premise, and it would just get more and more exaggerated and more zany as the chapter went on. It always just escalated and escalated in ways that I loved and found hilarious. Like, not only was it funny, but it's also just a really entertaining storytelling method of basically, like, taking a single plot thread and, like, extending it as far as it can possibly stretch. One of the chapters towards the end of the manga gets sort of meta, and it's about, like, the creator, you know, getting approached by his editor saying, like, oh, some of our manga for our magazine are getting adapted into anime, and we want yours to be one of the adaptations. You just need to, like, make it more marketable. And, you know, in typical Dementia 21 style, it goes through this whole, like, exaggeration, this whole, like, progression that escalates more and more. where it's like, oh, you know, you need to make the main character sexier. Also, readers don't care about elderly characters, so you need to just make all of the characters be cute girls. And, people don't want to hear about, like, medical problems and issues like that in this manga. You need to just make it, like, funnier and more mundane things, and, basically keeps changing and changing this manga until it becomes something unrecognizable. But that also, like, in addition to being really funny, that ties into my overall thoughts about it, which is, I kind of wish Dementia 21 could reincarnate into just a slightly different manga, that isn't necessarily about caring for the elderly in every single chapter, but would have that same storytelling style where you start off with just kind of a simple premise and then just, like, exaggerate it and escalate it as much as you possibly can until, like, that plot thread just snaps under its own weight. I highly recommend Dementia 21. There really is nothing like it. Now, the other kind of epilogue series I want to talk about, the series that I could not get any images of online, at least none pertaining to the chapters I read, was Hikari-Man. I talked about this one previously, how it's by the creator of Homunculus and, Ichi the Killer. Only this one is, like, kind of a weird superhero story. It's about a pro gamer in high school who, like, gets sucked into the electrical grid and becomes this, like, phantom being made of electricity, completely detached from his real body. I'm sure I talked last time about how it's a very, like, unconventional idea of a superhero because he doesn't really, like, decide to fight crime. I mean, he does a little bit of that. He does a little bit of trying to save people. He also, like, just vindictively attacks his bullies and people who have wronged him and just starts to feel like he's quite the badass. And starts picking fights just for the sake of it, basically. Bizarrely, he encounters the owner of, like, a used electronics store or something, who also happens to know a lot about what the main character is going through, and is, like, able to not only beat his ass, but also then become sort of a mentor character to him, and, like, teach him about how he's able to use his electrical powers and, like, what the risks are and stuff like that. And then, even more bizarrely, the story then shifts to being about this, like, shut-in otaku character who is able to, like, shove his fingers up somebody's nose and give them, like, an electrical lobotomy and turn them into a zombie. Also, he himself is incapable of feeling pain, and he kidnaps women, takes them back to his apartment, dresses them up like anime characters, and then releases them back onto the streets in zombified form. And it's about the main character and the owner of the junk shop trying to stop that guy now. That guy who came out of nowhere. Sure, cool, I'm here for it. Yeah, this is a character who finds 3D women just utterly repulsive, and 2D women are the only ones for him. And this manga has now taught me all kinds of colorful terms used by such people, such as 3D PD, which the margins of these pages assured me is a very offensive term, and it means 3D pig disgusting, and it's used by guys like him to refer to, like, the disgusting elements of human nature, like needing to use the bathroom and sweating and, like, needing to eat with our human mouths. The margins of this manga assured me that that's a very offensive term, and I'm just sitting here like, if this fucking guy called me 3D pig disgusting, I think I would just laugh my ass off. I'd just be like, yeah, fucking okay, guy, sure. Go home and jack off to hentai. I don't care. Anyway, I think this most recent volume actually got me more on board with Hikari-Man. I actually am pretty eager to read more, and I think there's only one more book yet to come out in English, so hopefully you'll be hearing about that in my next summer recap. Before I'm done for this season, I guess the last thing I'll go over is some additional things that I bought. Things that I either haven't read yet or have read previously. So first of all, Planetes came out in beautiful deluxe hardcover editions with copper trim on the pages. And there's volume 2 for you. Once again, it is only a 2-volume long series, but I have not even taken the plastic wrap off of these yet, and I probably won't until I'm actually going to reread the series again. It is an all-time fave. It's not quite one of the series that made me get into manga, but it's one of the series that made me really love manga. And I have talked about it several times in the past. The other cool thing that I bought recently, I went to a used bookstore and I found these guys. These are called Tokyo Pop Sneaks. And what they are basically preview volumes of upcoming manga published by Tokyo Pop. And these are all dated 2003 and 2004. I was with my friend in the bookstore and telling him about how man, you have no idea, Tokyo Pop used to completely rule the scene of publishing manga in America. It was them and Viz and basically nobody else for a while there. And in some of these volumes, you get to get previews of such cool series as Battle Royale or Tokyo Mew Mew. They got DN Angel on here. They got... Hold on, what the fuck does that say? Eerie Query. Oh. And Girl Got Game. Sure. I have barely looked at these at all, but the really fascinating thing about them is they come from that time period when English language manga publishers weren't sure yet if they wanted to orient the books like real volumes of manga from Japan, or if they wanted to mirror all of the artwork in everything they published, which, was considerably more work, and eventually we did away with. And so what's neat about these books is you read them from both sides. So if you start from one side, this is, the traditional manga orientation, and that, there's 8 preview chapters you can read here, and then you flip it over and have it faced like an English language book, and there's 4 more preview chapters there to check out, which feature the mirrored artwork. And I just find that really cool. And, I don't know if I'm going to read these, preview volumes in their entirety, but I might, skim through them and maybe talk about some of the highlights next time. We'll see. But, in the middle of this one, I found, this list of all the upcoming releases Tokyo Pop had in, the spring and fall of 2003. And, man, they had everything here. They had, they had Battle Royale, they had Digimon, they had Great Teacher Onizuka, which I still want to see republished in English one of these days. Whoever is holding the rights now. They had the Cowboy Bebop manga. They had Gundam, they had Initial D. They had Cardcaptor Sakura. They had Lupin the Third. They had the Fooly Cooly manga. Seriously, Tokyo Pop had everything back in the day. They had SpongeBob SquarePants. interesting. Anyway, those are just some treasures from a time when, like, sadly, I had not yet gotten into manga at all. I really kind of wish I was, like, earlier to the scene. It's one of my great regrets in life that I didn't become more of a massive weeaboo earlier in my life. Think of how much more I could have accomplished. Think of how much more I could have read if I had gotten an earlier start. But, at any rate, I'm here now. I'm here telling you about the latest and greatest manga to read. And honestly, like, I hope there comes a time, like, 15, 20 years from now when people look back on videos like this, like these 2003 guidebooks to all the hot new manga you should be reading. I hope people get as much joy 20 years from now as I am getting reading those, like, 20-plus year old manga compilations. I hope people that far in the future are like, oh man, you know how Tank Chair is like such a beloved masterpiece, and wow, back then nobody was reading it. Isn't that amazing how it took so long for it to catch on with people? And you know, they're gonna be saying like, oh, Kagurabachi, remember that? Oh, everyone thought that was gonna be the best thing since sliced bread, and now, like, hardly anybody remembers it. Remember that? Remember Kagurabachi? It sure is fun to call shots about future events that are definitely gonna happen. Just like, hey, you won't have to look back on these things as quaint little time capsules because I'm gonna keep on making them twice a year, and my opinions are always going to be relevant. Well, anyway, that's about it for this season, so, if you're not already a member of my Discord, please join that in the links below. We have a lot of fun sharing the dankest of memes, and occasionally discussing anime and mangas and video games. So we would welcome more chill people to that community, as long as you're cool. And also watch me on Twitch. Now that I am recording this from a new home, I actually have a decent internet connection and I can once again stream regularly. So follow me on Twitch and keep an eye out for that. I like to play lots of random games, rarely ever playing the same thing twice. So come on and check out those variety game streams that I do. Until then, thank you for visiting Truth's Manga Cafe, and I will see you in the summer, if not sooner. Bye bye. Special thanks to the financial supporters of Truth's Manga Cafe, listed here. If you want to join their illustrious ranks, you can give me $1. If you don't have $1, you can leave me some comments, and that will also earn you my love. Hope I'll be talking to all of you once again very soon.